Welcome to another edition of Full Circle, the Leapfrog series, where we explore the opportunity side of the geopolitical gyrations going on in the world and what they mean for Canada. I'm Edward Greenspon. Today's conversation is about a defining technological force of our time, artificial intelligence. It's foundational, what economists like to call a general-purpose technology. Think of electricity at the turn of the 20th century, or the internet over the past 50 years. They reshaped the competitive advantage of industries and nations, and they changed our lives. Is Canada set up for success in terms of research, talent, digital infrastructure? Will we be able to parlay the advantage that we have into a global position of consequence? With us today, Glenda is CEO of the Vector Institute, a national AI research center of excellence based in Toronto. Glenda brings deep insight from her years on the front lines of data and technological transformation, most of it guiding the financial services industry into the new tomorrow. And Audrey, Ancion, an AI strategy partner, she works with clients to develop skills, systems, and safeguards needed for Canadian businesses to be among the leaders, not the followers. Together, we'll explore what it will take for Canada to leapfrog in AI, and whether in fact anyone can even think of pulling off a leapfrog without getting AI right. A warm welcome to you both. Glenda, let's start with you, and I'd just like to get a sense of the scope of what we're talking about. Just how big is AI? How profoundly will it, or is it already changing the world and changing our lives?
So I think your intro was bang on. It is here. It is changing pretty much all aspects of our economy. And so, my background in financial services, the banks have been moving in this space in Canada for over 10 years. Things like fraud prevention, risk management, customer service. But it's not just the banks. So we see large pharma companies, life sciences companies that are using AI to really help with drug discovery, better patient care pathways. We see telecom companies that are using it for logistics, for preventative maintenance. We're seeing rail companies use it for preventative maintenance, for logistics. So I think there's really not any sector of the economy that will not be impacted by AI in some way, shape, or form.
So just drawing perhaps on your financial services background that you mentioned, can you just give us an example of how it is changing the productivity of the industry, how it's changing the experience of consumers? I mean, just, kind of specific example in your career of, okay, AI did this, solved this problem, made this better.
Well, I'm actually going to use an example from an Australian bank I worked at. So I was working there during COVID, and there were, as in Canada, many government programs to support business. And so one of the things that we used AI for was speech analytics to ensure that our customer contact center was in compliance with the government programs, so that in real time, we could make sure that we were giving the best advice to our customers. So the contact center managers were able to coach and better train their employees that we would give the best advice. Now, without AI, we would only have been able to spot check randomly. Whereas with AI, we could make sure that every call, every customer interaction was good, was in the benefit of the customer, was compliant with the legislation. And so that's just one example. And that was hugely productive. It made the bank feel comfortable that they were actually compliant completely with what they were trying to achieve, that, there was no human error, if you will. But it also reduced the cost, because previously to try and monitor every single call every single day like that would have been enormously expensive and frankly unfeasible.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. Let's pull the camera back a little bit for a second, and maybe you could help us understand how AI fits into the challenge that, Canada is facing at the moment. We increasingly need to depend on ourselves. We need to forge new global relationships. We need to strengthen our economy, keep the country secure. So how mission critical is AI to pulling off this kind of leapfrog?
I don't know how we actually become a much more self-sufficient, independent, sovereign country. I think it is hugely critical. to our future. But I also think we have the AI talent, we have the research, we have the innovation, and we have like strong natural resources and great companies. We have everything we need to leapfrog. What we need to do is actually have the will to take it forward. And that's critical. Like AI embedded in business actually amplifies a business's strategy. It doesn't replace it. It just amplifies. It makes it stronger, makes it go further. And I think the same is true for our economy and our country. I think there's a lot of good that can come out of AI societally. So it's not just about the economy. It's about benefits in health. It's about benefits to the environment. So I think it actually informs and shapes the future of our country from the ground up.
In your answer, you used the word sovereignty, and one hears the word sovereignty often now around data, around AI. What do we mean, because this is a technology that bridges all, certainly the internet with which we're now all familiar is a global technology, not one confined to national states. So when we're talking about sovereignty, what are we really talking about?
I think we're talking, at least in my opinion, we're talking about control over our destiny. So meaning sovereign compute, where the actual infrastructure resides here in Canada, and that a foreign country can't decide to turn it off. That we have control over whether it's on or off. That we have control over how our sovereign data assets, for example, how our health data is used, how our public sector data is used. And so to me, sovereign is all around control. Control of Canadians for Canadians, right? So by Canadians, if you will. So that to me is why it matters. The other reason why you want sovereign compute is, and sovereign data, frankly, is it's a huge factor in retaining the AI talent advantage we have. So I have built several AI data science teams and companies, and I can tell you, I need three things to keep them. So once their pay is kind of competitive, I'm not talking about paying them astronomical sums in the market. I need compute, I need data, and I need interesting problems to solve. So I have no problem with the third item, but compute and data is what helps me retain my team at companies. And that is true on the national level when we look at our AI researchers. We need sovereign compute that we can then dedicate not just to our researchers, but to new business, small business, not-for-profits. And we need sovereign data sets that, again, we can control how they're used and for what purpose.
Well, I'm fascinated by the interplay of those three things. Correct me if this is wrong, that, research doesn't exist in a vacuum. Researchers want to be on a cutting edge of practice as well if they're going to do their work. So do we have both sides of that equation?
We have both theoretical and applied researchers, basically. So if I take Safe AI, for example, Mila in Montreal and Amy in Edmonton, our other two, my sister research institutes, if you will, have researchers that are at the forefront, the leading edge, the frontier of Safe AI. At Vector, we have many researchers that are applied researchers in terms of Safe AI. So it's both. And the thing with retaining that AI talent advantage that we have is that the talent wants to go where the opportunity is. And opportunity is now increasingly being defined as a commercial option, right? So the researchers want to be able to get their innovation, their research into a commercial adoption. And if Canadian businesses aren't going to pick up, if Canadian businesses aren't going to partner with them, then they will go to a country where those companies will. And right now we lag. So the global AI adoption rate for business is 34%. In Canada, it's 26%. And we lag the other G7 countries in this. So we have serious work to do in our business community in picking up our socks in terms of really driving hard into AI adoption, because that is also key for how we keep that talent advantage that we've spent years building.
Audrey, when you hear that adoption globally is 34%, in Canada it's only 26%, and you're on the front lines with a lot of different companies as they try to adapt into the world of AI. Do those numbers surprise you?
Unfortunately, they do not surprise me. This is a problem we've had for many years, the adoption in Canada, and it is linked to our risk appetite. And unfortunately, this lack of appetite is translating in very small demand, which, as Glenda highlighted, it hurts the AI sector as a whole. Because if we don't have local demand for Canada-made AI and Canada talent, we will lose this advantage.
And to what do you attribute the blockage? Like, what's in the way of them being faster adopters?
I think one of the gaps we're seeing is the lack of a holistic approach towards the technology. So people think first and foremost, this is a technology that will do magic. But unfortunately, that's not the way it works. You need good data to use AI. You need people. People fundamentally use the technology. And if you put a bot in between or AI in between two manual tasks, you've not redesigned your process. You've not improved things forward. So what we're finding is people or organizations tend to lack this holistic approach, where technology is one part of the puzzle, but it's not the only one.
And Ed, do you mind if I weigh in on that as well? Because I agree with Audrey is saying, but I would also add maybe a +1. I think there is a legitimate concern around the safe, responsible use of AI. Like, I do think there are companies that are legitimately worried about it. And I would have two things to say to them. Number one, like I mentioned a bit earlier, we have world expertise in the safe use of AI. Mila, Amy, Vector, we're all in that space and we are ready to help. Vector produced trustworthy, safe AI principles years ago. So there is help for Canadian companies if that's their concern. And then the second thing that I would point to is that we have highly regulated companies like banks, like insurance companies, like life sciences companies that are dealing with incredibly sensitive data that have adopted AI. And so I guess what I would say to other sectors of the economy is if they can do it, you can do it. And so reach out, talk to your networks, talk to people in the banks, talk to people in the insurance and the pharma companies, find out how they got over the hurdle of safe and responsible, and start digging in and start doing and learning. And again, nobody's asking you to like AIify everything tomorrow, right? It's start. Get going, build your knowledge, build your skill, and then scale up.
I want to talk about the safe AI proposition and the resistance to AI in a couple of moments. But I also want to stick with the kind of holy trinity that you described earlier of talent, compute, and data. Let's just dig a little bit deeper into talent for a moment before we move forward there. So Vector published a snapshot of Ontario's AI system just last month in June. And it showed Canada ranked first in the G7 in terms of talent growth. And of course, as you were saying earlier, talent attracts investment and usage. So are we where we want to be? I mean, is talent growth the building block, the takeoff point?
So look, here's I think the word I would use for our state of play in AI is paradox. So we are leading, absolutely leading in AI talent growth, and other countries are trying to play catch up, but we are lagging in business adoption, as I've been saying. So we're both ahead and we're behind. So that's the contradiction of the moment that we sit in. But there are encouraging signs, like our recent report shows. In the last year, more than 17,000 AI jobs were created in Ontario, and that's double over the prior year. I would also note that the private investment in Ontario AI hit $2.6 billion last year. And that's a 69% increase. And then the last number I would share is there were 70 new AI companies launched in Ontario last year. So these are all extremely positive indicators that we have strong foundations for a leapfrog moment, if you will. But frankly, I worry at night that we're still not moving fast enough. We're still not driving hard enough in this space.
Maybe you can weigh in on that paradox and the kinds of things you're doing to help companies.
Yes, I think one way to help companies is to help them prioritize where to start with AI, because those will determine the rest of the pathway. And so getting information, knowledge, and experience on within your industry, what are the proven use cases? Where do you see real advantage? And also asking yourself as a company, where do we have data? And so reflecting on that and having a first purposeful step is very important for organizations. The research and the data points are there, and that's a great place to start.
It seems to me that even where we have data, we create obstacles to using that data. And I think, it's, nothing's more obvious than the healthcare system, where data is divided up into, different jurisdictions. And even within those jurisdictions, certain people don't want to release the data, have it speak to each other. How are we going to get at our data, Glenda?
Well, Ed, if I had the magic answer to that, look, there are initiatives underway right now. There is an initiative called Vital, which is actually looking at creating a health data set that would then basically enable us to advance in terms of applying AI in clinical trials, drug discovery, et cetera. So there are initiatives that are underway. We do need interprovincial cooperation on this. We do need mechanisms for the data to be standardized across jurisdictions for sure. But there are ways to do this. Look, privacy enhancing technology is not new. It has been around for a while. That's again an area of research that continues to unfold. But there are techniques to basically de-identify data so that we can do these things safely and securely. But this is where we need provincial governments coming together to tear down barriers between provinces. This is where we need real leadership. And so, I would encourage folks to look at the Vital initiative. It's an area that we all need to be pushing our governments, our communities to get into for the benefit of Canadians, not just for random purposes.
Audrey, maybe you could also just explain some of the obstacles. For instance, I hear, I've been in the news business and I've been a creator of news and I like my IP. But there's an argument that, that the protection of that IP interferes with the advancement of AI and data. Are these kinds of problems that you run into as companies are trying to work this through?
I think that's an issue, but I would say it's not the biggest one that organizations raise, because, for example, one of the ecosystem player we work with is called Scale AI, and Scale AI brings together consortium of organizations that come together and have a common pain point and solve this together. So I want to say on this point, Ed, I'm actually seeing great examples of collaboration in Canada, and the Scale AI one is just one of those.
And they share their data?
There is a consortium agreement where IP rights are established and negotiated, but it's turned into a strength for Canadians. And one of the great data points we saw in the Vector report also is the number of patents that's increasing in Canada, while outside of Canada, this number is decreasing for AI. So I would like us to think positively when we think IP and we think patents. We do have a Canadian advantage there as well.
Okay, well, I don't want to be a negative person in here, so I'm happy you gave me something to grab onto there. That's quite positive. So I've been talking about obstacles. Maybe you could explain why it is that we're moving ahead on patents while other people seem to be in some retreat in the pace of new patents. Glenda?
I think that actually is linked to the new jobs and the new companies that are forming in Ontario. I think the two go hand in hand. I think maybe perhaps some of our Canadian fellows are waking up to patents. And look, I was thrilled to see that we had a 10% increase year on year versus others, but I would still be maybe a bit of, I don't mean to be a downer, but it's on a relatively small base. So we need to be moving even faster in that space. We need to be, increase our patents by 25% year on year to catch up. And I think I am encouraged by the science. And like I said, I think a lot of the numbers coming out of this report are very encouraging, but there's still so much to do.
Okay, so let's go to the third point on the Trinity, which is compute. And I'll ask both of you in succession about that. Compute's a strange word to start with for people. It's a new word in the vocabulary. So maybe, Glenda, you just start by explaining what compute is, and then both of you maybe will tell us where we stand on compute and what the implications of that are.
Sure. So, look, the best way to think about AI compute is to think about it like a highway or a road. It's got to be part of our national infrastructure that makes our businesses hum and grow. So that's how you think about it. What is it? So essentially, to create some of these sophisticated AI models, you actually need huge AI compute, which is the processor, the memory, and the storage, all working together in concert. And so think about your phone. Every few years, the battery doesn't work as well. It's not as fast as all the other ones, and you have to upgrade. Compute is exactly the same. It's something that we need to refresh on a recurring annual basis. So not that every single chip needs to be refactored every year, but on an annual basis, we need to be uplifting probably a third to half of our AI compute. So the reason why we care about compute, like I said, it's big in terms of attracting and retaining talent. And I am encouraged. The federal government has put aside investment for it. So that is great news. But what we really need is the provinces to step up and for the provinces to view this as a nation building infrastructure. And they need to play a role in this as well. And frankly, what we find is if I've got a researcher here, so here's why you care. If I've got a researcher in Toronto and they're working on some really great breakthrough around health AI, for example, if they don't have access to compute to basically power their research, they will go to where the compute is. So they will leave, they will go to Silicon Valley, they will go to the UK, they will go to France, they will go to where the compute is so they can do their research and their innovation. And so then you might say, well, Glenda, it's just one researcher. There's lots, right? Well, no, it's that researcher. It's the team of postdoc and grad students that work around them. But more importantly, it's the research and innovation that they're creating that we lose. And so we actually then, it creates this ripple effect where we lose the economic growth that could result of the fact of that one researcher's work. And so kind of like, for lack of a nail, we lost the horse or shoe. So we need to get the compute in order to get the economic growth.
And is the nationalism that we see in Canada and some of the concerns about the United States, is that shifting the equation, or is it really, not big enough in the idea that I want to have a fulfilling career?
I think it's a shift in the equation. I think the geopolitical environment plays a role for sure. I think Canada's in a spot where there's the potential to attract top researchers, but we need to have the resources. We need to have the compute, and we need to have a business community that's saying yes, and we're going to want to adopt what you build. We're going to want to invest in it. We're going to want to advance it to the next level.
Audrey, from your perspective, do you run into what I'm just going to call a compute deficit?
We saw our clients welcome the announcement from the federal government to invest in the compute strategy with over $2 billion. And I love Glenda's metaphor of the highway. Canadians should know that we now have very strong highways for AI, and we encourage them to use them. We need to draw the attention to that. So, of course, we have a deficit. And if you look at numbers, I think that we are, our capacity is 10 times lower than the US on a GDP adjusted basis. So still ways to go. But I think the optimist in me is welcoming the investment and encouraging Canadian leaders to not use this as an excuse to delay investments. There is enough compute capacity for many organizations here in Canada to use it in an applied fashion. So let's use the highways, please.
If I could just plus one on Audrey, there are companies that are building out sovereign compute, more cloud computing options that are coming online this year. So there is going to be more and more compute coming. It's just, I guess my message is we need to keep going. Like, let's not assume this is a one and done. This is an ongoing investment we need to make.
Okay, let's circle back to safety. And I think, again, maybe it'd be good to explain what we mean by safety. Do we mean, like in 2001 Space Odyssey, HAL taking command of the ship and, preventing that kind of thing? Is that what we're talking about, or safety? Or is that a myth? And then I also want to put it together with resistance to the concern about jobs, that people have about jobs. And we hear now about agents. And so, Glenda, I just want you to do a little bit of an education for us to start about what we mean by safety, what we mean about agents. And then, we can assess, where we are in both those places and whether public confidence, how we establish public confidence at a level that will be necessary.
So look, safety is a broad topic. So it absolutely, if you're looking at the frontier research, does mean let's prevent a HAL 2001. Let's make sure that as AI is progressing, that it is doing so in a safe manner. But for most businesses, frankly, we're not at that level of using that type of AI. So it's really about making sure that as a company, you actually have established what your ethical principles around the use of data and AI are, and that you've embedded those principles into your operations in how you select and use AI. And does the AI that you either purchase or build line up to those ethical standards that you have set? And there are many companies that have done that. There's now an ISO standard that you can get certified on for AI governance. So there are clear guardrails that are out there in the public that you can adopt. So really it's around how do you do it so that, how do you adopt AI such that it drives benefit to your business, to your customer, to your employees, but you do it in such a way that is ethical and responsible. So I think that's more the day-to-day question for most companies. Now, agents or agentic AI, as it is often called, is where the computer now is, and the AI is now making decisions. And so it's not just understanding, the question, it's also proposing the answer, if you will. And so when you start looking at adopting agentic AI, you want to make sure you've got a human in the loop, meaning a human is part of the process and checking and making sure that the right answers are going to the customers or that the right action is being taken. So it's not about letting the AI go and not monitoring. You absolutely need to be monitoring it. So these are different types of jobs that are now getting created. So your comment on jobs, yes, there will be an impact. I'm going to date myself, but I remember when spreadsheets were the big thing in the 90s, and it was like a huge thing if you were an expert in Excel. Now it's going to be how strong are you in using ChatGPT? How strong are you in using these and in using them appropriately so that you get the right results? So I do think we'll see a shift and there'll be different types of jobs. And certainly, I actually think there will be a lot of jobs around data. And how do we make sure that we've got good data, clean data, that it's structured in a way that can be used by our AI? Because AI is 100% based on data. So good data leads to good AI. So I think there's going to be a lot of new jobs that I can't even imagine sitting here today. I don't know what they will be. But, the new one that came up a couple of years ago was prompt engineers, right? Like 5 years ago, no one had heard of what that was, right? In the first time I heard it, I'm like, oh my word, somebody's made up a new job title. So it's how do you actually use AI such that it drives the benefit and does so ethically, responsibly, safely?
Audrey, we hear a lot of criticism from time to time that too much attention is paid to defense when we talk about AI, and perhaps not enough attention is paid to offense, the productivity gain, the business gains, the lifestyle, quality of life gains. How do you assess the safety issues?
The development and promotion of AI can be a strength for Canada. We have a combination of researchers and organizations that are applying leading practices to develop trustworthy AI in a way that doesn't stifle innovation. I'm very proud of our Canadian organizations in this area, and I think this is a place where Canada can shine on the global stage.
Glenda, I want to finish up on jobs, which is the other issue we raised. If there's anything that I think makes Canadians anxious, it's the idea that some technology is going to come and take their job. And I know we can look at economic history and say that that's not actually how it works, but even then, there's always a period of disruption. Should people be worried about their job?
What I would say is I would strongly encourage people to go out and learn, to not be fearful, but to go educate yourself, learn how to use these tools and build some expertise in them. For companies, especially small companies, I know that can be a daunting task if you're thinking about, you've got maybe 50 people in your company and how do you make that transition? All of the institutes are working on driving adoption across the business sector. And at Vector, we actually have a program specifically focused on small companies. So companies less than 500 people, it's called Fastlane. And one of the things we do is we work with those small companies to help them upskill their employees. And in some cases, we actually help them hire their first machine learning person and help them actually move their product, their service more towards AI. And so I would say, look at it as an opportunity to learn something new and get involved. Like, don't wait for the change to happen to you. You figure out how you want to manage the change, how you want to participate, because AI is here. It's not a fad. It's not going away. So let's all just get in and start learning and trying new things.
Last question. Audrey and then Glenda, if you had one thing that you'd like to see happen to make Canada more competitive in AI, to allow us to be more sovereign, what would that one thing be? Audrey.
I'd love for our country to have targets in terms of adoption so that we have something as a country to aim towards. It's hard to improve something without measuring it and having a goalpost, having something to look forward to so that we can rally people around it. I think that could help act as a catalyst in the next few months.
Glenda.
All right, I'll try and keep this short, Ed, but here's my pitch. I've heard my whole career that Canadians are nice and polite. And I always tell people, not on the ice. You put a hockey stick in a Canadian's hand, they are not nice on the ice. What I would like to see is the ambition, the drive to win that we have when we play hockey, when we curl, which is my sport, when we do any of our winter sports. I would like to see that ambition, that drive to win, move into our business sector in AI. Please take that will to win. Please think about slamming your global competitors into the boards. Let's look to win in the AI space.
Well, I think those are both doable things. So let's get on and get it done. And I want to thank you both for being with us today on Full Circle, the Leapfrog series.
Thank you, Ed.
Thanks, Ed.
Okay, Audrey, we're back for a minute to do a bit of a recap. So what would your main takeaways be from today's discussion?
I really love that Glenda used that hockey analogy. We do want to encourage every Canadian to play. Right now, we have a few very, very strong teams in large enterprises, but we think there's an opportunity to infuse AI into every business out there, in every organization. We also think there's a big role for the public sector. We talked about healthcare on this podcast, but there's also many other areas. So we just want to encourage people to pick up the sport.
Okay, so we want to encourage everyone to get on the ice, and therefore we'll have more people who will both benefit in their own experiences, but more candidates to rise up to gold medalists.
100%. And like every sport, it requires training. You can't just become a great hockey player like that. It requires training, rigor, and discipline, and some inputs. We've talked about data. We've talked about the importance of people and risks. There are risks when you're on the ice. So you need to be aware of those and mitigate those. So you don't just show up on the ice unprepared. There's things to do in advance, but it's very doable.
Okay, well, Audrey, I want to thank you for that, and thank you for the work you're doing.
Thanks, Ed.
All right. So everyone, AI is moving fast, and, so is the world around it, which makes it even more imperative. It's integral to any Canadian leapfrog strategy. And the history of general purpose technologies is that they're disruptive, but that's followed by higher standards living, better quality of life. Glenda Crisp and Audrey Ancion have mapped out a route in today's discussion, and I thank them both for helping us here on Full Circle, the Leapfrog series. If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with a colleague and subscribe for more conversations on the issues shaping Canada's future. Until next time, I'm Edward Greenspon. Thanks for listening to Full Circle, the Leapfrog series.